from his mission to take some time to explore the New Jersey coast. He eventually returned to his assignment and sailed up the river that now bears his name, hoping that it would finally lead to the Orient. Of course, he failed to find the passage, but his discovery of good farmland, populated by friendly Indians surrounding a large harbor, did have the notable effect of changing Dutch attitudes about colonizing North America. After Hudson's return to Holland, the Dutch organized the United New Netherlands Company to facilitate trade in the territory Hudson had discovered, now called New Netherlands. 3 years later, a new corporation was established, the Dutch West India Company, and by June of 1623, New Netherlands was established as an official Dutch province with the Dutch West India Company facilitating the process of colonization. That same year, 30 families came to these shores looking to make a life for themselves in the New World. Their first governor was Cornelius Jacobson May, namesake of Cape May. 3 years later, a new governor was appointed named Peter Minuet. He purchased Manhattan Island from the Lenni Lenape for 60 guilders, about $30 today, and he built a fort at the foot of present-day Broadway on Manhattan Island. Naturally, because the leadership of the Dutch West India Company was from Amsterdam, the capital of the new colony became New Amsterdam. By the late 1620s, the company was having a difficult time getting new colonists to come to this part of New Netherlands, as we now know Hudson County. The economy back home was booming, and the economy here in the New World at the same time was largely limited to the fur trade. So to spur development, the company decided to initiate a policy we still continue to this day. It gave out tax abatements. Here's the offer the company made. Here's the offer the company made. Anyone who could get 50 adults to colonize the land west of New Amsterdam within 4 years would be considered a patroon or feudal lord of his own little colony. Each land grant would include either 8 or 16 miles of riverfront and extend westward into the countryside for as far as the patroon was willing to govern. The patroon would get full title to the land, the power to appoint local officials, to establish courts, and to appoint judges. He would be responsible to satisfy the claims of the Indians in whatever land he controlled. In return, the company agreed to build a fort, protect the colonists, and import slaves to work the farms. In addition, the patroons were granted an 8-year exemption from taxes, and the settlers given a 10-year exemption. Several Dutch citizens took up the offer, and their names still echo through the Hudson River Valley: Rensselaer, Van Cortlandt. Now enters Michael Paw, Burgermeister of Amsterdam and one of the controlling directors of the Dutch West India Company. He chose a large swath of land directly across from Manhattan, including Staten Island, present-day Hudson County, and part of the present-day Bergen County. He purchased the land from the Indians and had the Indian chiefs join in the deed with the company and the governor of the province. He named the colony after the Latinized version of his last name, Pavonia. In English, this means land of the peacock, hence the mascot of St. Peter's University, the peacock. Paw's grant bears the date of November 22nd, 1630, and is the earliest known conveyance for what is now Jersey City. 1630 is the date on the Jersey City seal. But Paw never set foot here. He sent Michael Paulson to take charge of the colony as superintendent. It is Paulson's name that we get Paulus Hook. Under his leadership, 2 settlements were built in Pavonia. The first settlement was at Communipaw, which stretched roughly from what is now Johnston Avenue on the north to Caven Point on the south, where an indentation of New York Bay called South Cove or Communipaw Bay reached up to what became Phillip Street, just east of the Central Railroad New Jersey tracks along the waterfront. Communipaw Bay was filled in by the railroads in the 1800s. All was well for 9 years until the next Director General, William Kieft, embroiled New Netherlands in Indian warfare that nearly dismantled the colony. Soon after his arrival in September 1639, Kieft levied a tax on the Indians living in all of New Netherlands, and in 1641, Kieft tried to avenge the deaths of a few Dutch settlers by local Indians in a retaliatory strike which would later be dubbed Kieft's War. On the night of February 25th, 1643, Kieft ordered an attack on the Indians in Pavonia. Though he told his soldiers to spare the women and children, they ignored his orders and killed 80 Indian men, women, and children. 11 Indian tribes who had previously been at odds with each other united to drive out the Dutch. Most Dutch colonists were either killed or captured. Those who were fortunate escaped to New Amsterdam, where they could watch their homes and their crops burned from across the river. Pavonia was destroyed. Peace did not return to the area until a ceasefire agreement ended hostilities in August 1645. Settlers in the colony asked the Dutch West India Company to recall Kieft to Holland for an investigation, and the hostilities convinced many settlers to return home to Europe. The Dutch experiment in the New World was teetering on the brink of collapse. In 1646, hoping to restore order and profitability to the colony, the Dutch West India Company appointed Peter Stuyvesant, Director General of New Netherlands. A former soldier, he had served as governor of the Dutch Caribbean island of Curacao, where he lost his right leg fighting the Spanish. The injury forced him to wear a wooden stick as an artificial limb, leaving him with the unfortunate nickname of Peg-Leg Pete. Many believe that the uncomfortable prosthesis may have been the reason for his reputed nasty demeanor and autocratic style. But however unpleasant and dictatorial he may have been, he was at the very least practical and learned a great deal about what to do or not to do from his predecessor. Stuyvesant adopting a more conciliatory tone with the Indians, and the colony flourished. New settlers arrived and looked as though Stuyvesant was achieving the objectives he was chosen to do, bring about peace and prosperity in the New Netherlands. But it wasn't long before he was tested. On September 5th, 1655, in what became known as the Peachtree War, the colony was almost destroyed a second time. It began when a young Indian girl entered the orchard of Henry Van Dyke on Manhattan Island and picked the peach of a tree. Incensed, Van Dyke shot her, killing her instantly. Unfortunately for the Dutch, Stuyvesant, the entire Dutch Defense Force, had left the colony days earlier, heading for the Delaware Valley. Taking advantage of his absence, 500 Indians swept through Hoboken, Livonia, and Staten Island, killing over 100 colonists and capturing over 100 more. On his return to New Amsterdam, Stuyvesant faced a grave situation. But he successfully negotiated with the Indians and bargained for the release of the captives who were being held at Paulus Hook. Ultimately, the captives were returned for a ransom of gunpowder and lead. Following this last Indian crisis, Stuyvesant realized that the settlers at Pavonia needed to establish a fortified town for defense, rather than return to live on their isolated estates along the Hudson River. With this in mind, and as part of the peace negotiations, on January 30th, 1658, Stuyvesant met with local Indian chiefs at Fort Amsterdam for the repurchase of the Western Shore. It included all the lands between the Hackensack and the North Hudson River, from Weehawken and Secaucus to the Kilvan Cull. At his request, the Council of New Amsterdam approved a hilltop site for a garrison-style town or village. Settlers from the colony were invited to move to the fort and live behind a square wooden palisade where they could defend themselves with the militia against the Indians. The site chosen was a former cornfield cleared by the Indians on the heights, approximately 2 miles from the Hudson River, and it was named Bergen, the Dutch word for hill. Settlers built homes on lots within the fort and established farms outside its walls, creating a defensive zone against the Indians. Stuyvesant then signed a peace treaty with the Indians on March 6, 1660, making the Peachtree War the last major Dutch-Indian hostility in New Netherland. On September 5, 1661, Stuyvesant issued a charter of incorporation to the village of Bergen that included a court of justice, church, and a school. That same year, he granted Bergen limited powers of self-government and a court of inferior justice. Members of the Dutch Reformed Church, now the Old Bergen Church, began the establishment of a permanent meeting place, and the colony's first elementary school was built. The village stretched from what is now Broome Street on the south to Newkirk Street on the north, and from Tours Avenue on the east to Van Rypen Street on the west, with a tall log stockade built around it. What is now Bergen Avenue was the road that ran through its center, with gates and blockhouses at either end. A public square was laid out in its center. Now it's Bergen Square. A well in the middle was the town's first waterworks. Soon afterwards, another settlement sprang up again at Communipaw, stretching along Phillip Street, but it came under the government of Bergen. Its inhabitants reached Bergen by Jersey City's first road, which followed the present line of Communipaw Avenue up to what is now Summit Avenue, up to Academy Street, which led to the schoolhouse at Bergen Square, giving Academy Street its name. Little did those settlers know that their village would only exist 3 more years as a Dutch colony. While Stuyvesant was busy organizing the new fortified village at Bergen, English King Charles